This presentation is about the safe use of isocyanate products. It's a serious topic because pretty much in the Saskatchewan regulations, workers are allowed to have no exposure to isocyanates without protection. Our PowerPoint picture, you'd look, the person has supplied air. So if you look in the Saskatchewan regulations, people are not allowed to work with this product without respiratory protection. And it's in a lot of products that even consumers buy and use at home. So I'll talk about that. So today we're going to go over what are isocyanates, what the health effects in first aid is, what protective measures there are for isocyanates, and other considerations for handling isocyanates. Isocyanates are released as paints or other chemicals containing isocyanates bonds onto a hardening agent, and they form a polymer. So polymers are common like in plastics. It's just a repeating structure where it goes on and on. So really it's a nitrogen bond with a carbon and oxygen. And then it reacts with the hydroxyl group. So hydroxyls are found in water, alcohols, and bases. Isocyanate can react with water in the air. So if you really simplistic viewpoint, you have an acrylic resin is the red Lego and the isocyanate is the blue Lego, and we have them separate. We mix them together and then we get a cured paint, and then the isocyanate is the free. So once the cured paint is hardened, there's not any isocyanate left. It's been degassed. So it's in the application of paint or in the application of any isocyanate based products is the concern, or handling of them, right? So after the isocyanate's degassed, you could breathe it in. When it's a hardened product and you go to cut it, or you use a grind disc to cut a finished product, like obviously it's not good breathing in paint particulates either, but like the isocyanate isn't a risk at that point. So isocyanates in industries, they're found in coatings such as paints and varnishes, auto body and airplane repair compounds, spray-on products for tuck beds, trailers, and boats. And then isocyanates are also found in, if isocyanates are so dangerous, why do people use them? The durability, they form a unique chemical bond that's not really easily replaceable. Appearance, it looks really good. A lot of companies that use isocyanate-based paints, people comment on how great the paint looks. A lot of abrasion resistance. So if you have a product that's like going down gravel roads or something like that, it would be really good because it's not going to get cut up and start rusting right away. It cures at a low temperature, so the paint kiln doesn't need to be a really hot temperature. And then it applies fairly easily as well. So painters like using it from the standpoint of it's a good product to paint. So isocyanates can be used safely if you follow procedures for handling products and controlling isocyanate exposure. All spraying of isocyanate paints and primers must take place in a paint booth or like a spray booth. So this is where like having a generic WMIS program isn't ideal, because if you're just telling workers like, hey, these are the symbols that are dangerous, and you don't tell them specifically about the dangers of isocyanates, that's not good. So that's why this course exists, is a follow-up to basic WMIS. So like basic WMIS is required by law, but then also in WMIS, you're supposed to train workers about the specific chemicals they're handling. And that's why you have to have a course like this talking about just isocyanates. Also, you have to have an isocyanate control program, and this training is part of that. If you haven't taken WMIS through us yet, usually people don't know the new symbols, the two health hazard symbols, and both of these symbols are on the isocyanate containers. How do we prevent exposure? The most common form of isocyanate exposure is direct inhalation, so people don't know they're breathing in a toxin, and then they breathe it in. They get it on their skin, eye contact, so paint line bursts, or it's sprayed, or who knows, there's a lot of different ways of getting something in your eyes. Ingestion, people obviously don't try to eat the product, so you can have a paint line and something ends up in their mouth, but more likely it's going to be on their hands. They don't wash their hands when they before they eat, or in some companies people eat in the production area for whatever reason, and then again, so the production area probably doesn't have facilities to wash their hands really well, and then they end up eating the product slowly over time. So factors affecting overexposure: how big is the work area and the ventilation? How much are you being exposed to stuff? Are you just this health and safety guy walking by once in a while? Or are you a painter that's spraying this for 12 hours a day and you work overtimes and you're constantly being exposed to it? Temperature, if you're working in a hot temperature, the vapor pressure increases and it results in more evaporation of the product. So if you're working in a paint booth area in a hot summer day, again, there might be more paint fumes just even in the mixing area than in February in Saskatchewan. Health effects of overexposure: skin irritation, eyes, nose, throat, and lungs. This is called a sensitizer. So in the regulations, you have to look. There's a bunch as allergic sensitizers, but pretty much over time, you develop like an allergic reaction to a compound you weren't allergic to before. What's scary about this stuff is it could be your first exposure or it could be your 10,000th, and it kind of depends on your genetics, your background, and how much you're being exposed to it. So there's a lot of variations in this, but it's very serious that people understand why they need to use the correct PPE in the correct way when handling isocyanates. Kind of how it works is you start working in a place, so obviously you start getting exposed to it. There's an induction phase, so you're starting to be sensitized to it, but you aren't showing any symptoms, so you're asymptomatic. This is called the latency phase. You start developing symptoms, and then the symptomatic phase occurs, and then you develop occupational asthma. What with occupational asthma is, it's kind of like having an asthma attack for the rest of your life, and it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't go away, and the person struggles for breath for the rest of their life. Respiratory irritation symptoms may include like sore throat, coughing, chest tightness, shortness of breath, reduced lung function. So just because you're not hitting the occupational exposure limit doesn't mean you're going to have no adverse health effects, right? Like there's a legal limit, but some people might still have adverse effects below the legal limit. Overexposed though in Saskatchewan for isocyanates is pretty much zero. We'll get into that though. Skin irritation, it can be reddening, swelling, rash, blistering, and scaling. So pretty sore hands from being exposed to isocyanates. Sensitization already, but it's a hyperreactive allergy-like response. Skin symptoms, similar to irritation, but more severe, like the redness we saw there. Respiratory symptoms similar to asthma. Sensitization can result from one large exposure, inhalation or skin exposure, or repeated exposure above or below the exposure limit. That's why it's really concerning, because it could be just one massive blast. Somebody actually walks into a room they're not supposed to walk into and they develop sensitization, or it could be that worker that handles the product all the time and is just constantly having light and small exposures to it. So again, sensitization is the body's allergy-like response to a substance that's been inhaled or touched. Onset depends on the type of isocyanate, the dose, the route of exposure, and susceptibility of the individual. The response can be immediate, delayed, or both. Effects of sensitization: the allergic reaction triggered by very low concentrations. So again, it's just very trace amounts are causing these reactions. These reactions can happen over several thousands of exposures, but every exposure is under the legal limit. So it's kind of confusing probably from like the industrial hygiene standpoint. Well, why are they saying this is the acceptable limit? Well, for most people, most of the time, it's an acceptable limit. Isocyanates, again, that's why the exposure limit in the regulations is almost nothing, because it's so severe, the reaction. So what happens if you accidentally get the stuff on your skin? Wash immediately and thoroughly with soap and lukewarm water. For severe exposures, immediately get under the safety shower and begin rinsing. Remove contaminated clothing. If irritation persists, seek medical attention, aka go to the hospital. Accidental eye contact: move to an area free from further exposure. Flush with clean, lukewarm water for at least 15 minutes, lifting the eyelids. Refer to a physician for immediate follow-up. So the big thing is, with the 15 minutes, we want to make sure you get all of the isocyanate you possibly can get out of your eyes as quickly as possible. You don't want to be on the way to the hospital with this stuff in your eyes. Ambulance comes, they don't have a safety shower in the back. So like we want to keep it washing out while an ambulance comes. First aid for isocyanate exposures: accidental inhalation, move to an area free from risk of further exposure. If asthmatic symptoms develop, seek medical attention. Exposure protection controls. Always read the label and SDS before handling any chemicals. Ensure the area is well ventilated. Ensure you're wearing the personal protective equipment assigned to you by your supervisor. So we'll just do a quick review. What are the three symbols on paint containers and hardening agents? Just look back here. And we look forward. So there's flammable. I always call him Cancer Man. He's the long-term health hazard. And then this is another health hazard, but it's less severe, right? Flammables, they could be self-reactive, self-heating substances, organic peroxide. So that's not health hazard, can cause cancer, reproductive toxicity, reduces your fertility, can damage your liver organs, liver, kidney, and brains, and are the most common organs affected. Aspiration hazard, it causes lung damage, can cause respiratory sensitization, that institutional asthma we've been talking about. Cell mutagenicity, it can damage your eggs or sperm and pass on those mutant genetic defects to the child. Acute toxicity, skin irritation, acute toxicity, specific or target organ damage. So it's usually your liver or kidneys, sometimes brain, eye damage, skin irritation. Personal protection. You have to wear a face respirator if you're mixing this product. When applying it, you have to wear a supplied airline when you're using the stuff in Saskatchewan in a paint booth. So you have to wear supplied line. So in the regulations, you can look that up, but it is required supplied air. Nitro gloves or butyl gloves for paints. And then you want to wear a disposable Tyvek suit. So if you get paint on your paint suit, it's not going into your clothes and then into your skin. Touch-ups. If you're going to do a touch-up, a small touch-up area of paint, you have to wear organic paint cartridge. So you have to be fit tested by the health and safety team with a organic cartridge. The reason why we can use the organic cartridge and not a supplied airline in this is because of where the paint touch-ups are done is a gigantic paint bay, and the touch-ups are extremely small areas. If the touch-up area is larger, then you have to use supplied air. Keep in mind when the paint is degassing while mixing and applying the paint. So both of those times. So personal hygiene, clean contaminated skin thoroughly with soap and water, routinely wash up before smoke breaks, lunch, and leaving work. You don't want to have isocyanates going home with you. Improperly cleaning hands is how people ingest the chemicals. Even people that use chewing tobacco or smoke often will end up with isocyanates going in their mouth because their hands aren't clean and are touching the product that they're putting in their mouth. Launder or discard contaminated clothing. So how severe is this stuff? With industrial hygiene sampling in the Saskatchewan regulations, they tell us what the threshold limit is, and that's 0.02 parts per million. If you look at other hazards, it's more like that are in the paint process, it's more like 30 parts per million, 70 parts per million. This is 0.2 parts per million. So just think of this. It's the equivalent of going 2 centimeters on a 1,000-kilometer journey. It's really not very much, right? The exposure limit is very, very small for this product. We can use swipes to detect isocyanate-based products in the workplace. A good place to test this would be the lunchroom tables to make sure that the paint is being, or isocyanates are being contained to the paint area. Reactivity information, stable for mixing. Don't store above 49 degrees Celsius or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Prevent contact with water, alcohols, or bases. Like I said earlier in the course, that is how the product starts releasing, is that the isocyanate reacts with a hydroxyl, which is in water, bases, and alcohols, to release. Even with moisture, it can produce carbon dioxide and then can build up pressure in a closed container, and then in a worst case scenario, the closed container could explode. We're going to go over just real quickly the SDS2 today, but the key things are always report spills and get help, put on your PPE, control the spill, neutralize, allow 10 minutes to an hour with ventilation, clean up the materials, and then dispose of those materials. And then we have to do an incident investigation. If we sand or machine isocyanate products, so after the product is cured, Isocyanates are not going to be re-released because they've already escaped in the curing process. Uh, we require that workers wear particulate respirators. So isocyanates will not be released when you're sanding or cutting parts that have been painted because isocyanates already have the material released out of them. We do recommend that you still wear a particulate respirator so that you're not breathing in the metal or paint particulates. So we're going to review some key information on the SDS sheet from PPG here. Going through, it's flammable, it's acutely toxic, it's a skin sensitizer, it's a respiratory sensitizer, can cause cancer, can damage your organs. Just going real quick through here, danger. So with section 3, urethane hardener, the isocyanate is the hexylmethylene diisocyanate. So that's what this presentation has been about, is the diisocyanate. We've already talked about the first aid measures, firefighting measures. So you want to use a dry chemical, CO2, water spray foam, or fog. Don't use a water jet. Well, we've already talked about why you would not want to use water on this product because it'll release even more isocyanate. We already talked about the handling of it. So again, our exposure limits are extremely small for the diisocyanate. So it's got the LC and LD 50 on here. So 50% of lab animals will die with these concentrations for 4 hours. The point of this presentation is well informed, is well protected. Make sure you read labels and SDSs whenever you handle new chemicals. We do have engineering controls on site in the form of ventilation and enclosures. We don't have this material handled by anyone, and the material is always handled with supplied air when it's being painted. And when it's mixed, we have the other PP we've discussed. So with engineering controls, we have ventilation enclosures. Proper application work practices must be followed when handling this product. Protect your skin, eyes, and respiratory system, PPE always, and then use good personal hygiene when handling this product. So again, to review the training elements, what are isocyanates? You should know that for the quiz that's upcoming. Health effects and first aid, what protective measures requirement, and other considerations in handling isocyanates. So we're done the brief overview of what isocyanates are. Now we'll go to the quiz. Thank you for your time.